Welcome, and thank you for tuning into Rocky Will Read for You. It's been a long time, and I'm going to be reading from the Too Much and Never Enough. This is still part 1 in chapter 1. I would say this is about page 41 of 245. Please like, share, subscribe. Any of the above would be greatly appreciated. And also, please put any suggestions for things that you would like to hear down in the comment box. I would love to be able to read to you and improve upon my reading. So let's go. At more than 4,000 square feet, the house was the most impressive residence on the block, but still smaller and less grand than many of the mansions that dominated the hills in the northern part of the neighborhood. Set at the top of a rise, the house cast shadows in the afternoon over the wide flagstone steps that led to the sidewalk to the front door, an entrance we only used on special occasions. The lawn jockeys, racist reminders of the Jim Crow era, were first painted pink and then replaced with flowers. The full coat of arms on the pediment over the front door remained. Although Queens would eventually be one of the most diverse places on the planet, in the 1940s, when my grandfather bought the land and built the imposing red brick Georgian colonial with the 20-foot columns, the borough was 95% white. The upper-middle-class neighborhood of Jamaica Estates was even whiter. When the first Italian-American family moved into the neighborhood in the 1950s, Fred was scandalized. In 1947, Fred embarked on the most important large-scale project of his career up until that point, Shore Haven, a proposed complex in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, comprising 32 six-story buildings and a shopping center spread over more than 30 acres. The draw this time was the $9 million in FHA funds that would be paid to Fred directly, just as Donald would later capitalize on tax breaks lavished on him by both the city and the state. Fred had previously described the type of people renting the 2201 apartments as unwholesome. The implication that upstanding people lived only in the single-family dwellings that had been his early specialty. But $9 million can be very persuasive. Around that time, when it became clear that Fred's fortune would only continue to grow, he and his mother set up trust funds for his children that would shield the money from taxation. Though an iron-fisted autocrat at home and in his office, Fred had become an expert at gaining access to and kowtowing to more powerful and better-connected men. I don't know how he acquired the skill, but he would later pass it on to Donald. Over time, he developed ties to leaders of the Brooklyn Democratic Party, the New York State political machine, and the federal government, many of whom were major players in the real estate industry. If getting funding meant sucking up to the local politicos who held the FHA purse strings, so be it. He joined an exclusive beach club on the South Shore of Long Island and later North Hills Country Club, both of which he considered excellent places to entertain, impress, and rub elbows with men best positioned to funnel government funds his way, much as Donald would do at Le Club in New York in the 1970s and at golf clubs everywhere. As Donald was later alleged to do with Trump Tower and his casinos in Atlantic City, Fred was said to have worked discreetly with the mob in order to keep the peace. When he got the green light for another development, Beach Haven, a 40-acre, 23-building complex in Coney Island that would net him $16 million in FHA funding, it was clear that his strategy of building on the taxpayer's dime was a winner. Though Fred's business was built on the back of government financing, he loathed paying taxes and would do anything to avoid doing so. At the height of his empire's expansions, he never spent a dime he didn't have to, and he never acquired debt, an imperative that did not extend to his sons. Bound by the scarcity mentality that had been shaped by World War I and the Depression, Fred owned his properties free and clear. The profits from his company generated from rents were enormous. In relation to his net worth, Fred, whose children said he was tighter than a duck's ass, lived a relatively modest life. Despite the piano lessons and private summer camps of a piece with his notion of what was expected for a man his station in life, his oldest children grew up feeling white poor. Mary Ann and Freddie walked the 15 minutes to public school 131, and when they wanted to go into the city, as everyone in the outer boroughs of New York refers to Manhattan, they took the subway from 169th Street. Of course, they weren't poor, and aside from some early struggles after his father's death, Fred never had been either. Fred's wealth afforded him the opportunity to live anywhere, but he would spend most of his adult life less than 20 minutes away from where he had grown up. With the exception of a few weekends in Cuba with Mary in the early days of their marriage, he never left the country. After he completed the project in Virginia, he rarely even left New York City. His business empire, though large and lucrative, was equally provincial. The number of buildings he came to own exceeded 4 dozen, but the buildings themselves had relatively few floors and were uniformly utilitarian. His holdings remained almost exclusively in Brooklyn and Queens. The glitz, glamour, and diversity of Manhattan might as well have been on another continent as far as he was concerned. And in those early years, it seemed just as far out of reach. By the time the family moved into the house, everybody in the neighborhood knew who Fred Trump was. And Mary embraced her role as the wife of a rich, influential businessman. She became heavily involved in charity work, including at the Women's Auxiliary at Jamaica Hospital and the Jamaica Day Nursery, chairing luncheons and attending black tie fundraisers. No matter how great the couple's success, there remained for both Fred and Mary a tension between their aspirations and their instincts. In Mary's case, it was likely the result of a childhood marked by scarcity, if not outright deprivation, and in Fred's, a caution deriving from the massive loss of life, including his father's, during the Spanish flu and World War I, as well as the economic uncertainty his family had experienced after his father's death. Despite the millions of dollars pouring in from the Trump management every year, Fred still couldn't resist picking up unused nails or reverse engineering a cheaper pesticide. Despite the ease with which Mary took to her new status and the perks that went along with it, including a live-in housekeeper, she spent most of her time in the house, sewing, cooking, and doing laundry. It was as if neither of them could quite figure out how to reconcile what they could possibly have and what they would allow themselves. Although frugal, Fred was neither modest nor humble. Early in his career, he had lied about his age in order to appear more precocious. He had a propensity for showmanship, and he often tracked in hyperbole. Everything was great, fantastic, and perfect. He inundated local newspapers with press releases about his newly completed homes and gave numerous interviews extolling the virtues of his properties. He plastered South Brooklyn with ads and hired a barge covered with ads just to float off the shoreline. But he wasn't as nearly as good as Donald would come to be. He could handle interacting one-on-one and currying favor with his politically connected betters, but speaking in front of large crowds or navigating television interviews was beyond him. He took a Dale Carnegie public speaking course, but he was so bad at it that Even his usually obedient children teased him about it. Just as some people have a face for radio, Fred had a level of social confidence made for backrooms and print media. The fact would figure significantly in his later support of his second son at the expense of his first. When Fred heard about Norman Vincent Peale in the 1950s, Peale's shallow message of self-sufficiency appealed to him enormously. The pastor of Marble Collegiate Church in Midtown Manhattan, Peale was very fond of successful businessmen. "Being a merchant isn't getting money," he wrote. "Being a merchant is serving the people." Peale was a charlatan, but he was a charlatan who headed up a rich and powerful church, and he had a message to sell. Fred wasn't a reader, but it was impossible not to know about Peale's wildly popular bestseller, The Power of Positive Thinking. The title alone was enough for Fred, and he decided to join Marble Collegiate, although he and his family rarely attended. Fred already had a positive attitude and unbounded faith in himself. Although he could be serious and formal, or dismissive to people, such as his children's friends who were of no interest to him, he smiled easily. Even when he was telling somebody he or she was nasty, and was usually in a good mood. He had reason to be. He was in control of everything in this world, in his world. With the exception of his father's death, the course of his life had been fairly smooth and full of supportive family and colleagues. Since his early days building garages, his success had been on almost constantly upward trajectory. He worked hard, but unlike most people who work hard, he was rewarded with government grants and the almost limitless help of highly connected cronies and immensely good fortune. Fred didn't need to read The Power of Positive Thinking in order to co-opt, for his own purposes, the most superficial and self-serving aspects of Peale's message. Anticipating the prosperity gospel, Peale's doctrine proclaimed that you need only self-confidence in order to prosper in the way God wants you to. Obstacles are simply not permitted to destroy your happiness and well-being. You need to be defeated only if you are willing to be. Peale wrote. That view neatly confirmed what Fred already thought. He was rich because he deserved to be. Believe in yourself. Have faith in your abilities. A sense of inferiority and inadequacy interferes with the attainment of your hopes, but self-confidence leads to self-realization and successful achievement. Self-doubt wasn't part of Fred's makeup, and he never considered the possibility of his own defeat. As Peale also wrote, "It is appalling to realize the number of pathetic people who are hampered and made miserable by the malady popularly called the inferiority complex." Peale's proto-prosperity gospel actually complemented the scarcity mentality Fred continued to cling to. For him, it was not the more you have, the more you can give. It was the more you have, the more you have. Financial worth was the same as self-worth. Monetary value was human value. The more Fred Trump had, the better he was. If he gave something to someone else, that person would be worth more and he less. He would pass that attitude on to Donald in spades.